her parents were both college educated. Her mother had taught for a while. Her father, I forget where he went to school, but he also didn't graduate from college. He was a minister, but he earned a living by working at the post office. And on Sundays, he and the family would drive to Warrenton, Virginia, right? So he could preach and then come back. But on my mother's side, they were expected to go to college. My mother had an older brother, Henry, named after his father. Uncle Henry was a child prodigy, and he went to Oberlin Conservatory and got an undergraduate degree and a master's degree in music performance, which is, I mean, okay. What's the music organ performance from Oberlin College and Oberlin Conservatory. I'm sorry, Oberlin Conservatory. The college and the conservatory were two different things. Uncle Henry was the oldest of the three kids. Then came my mom. Since my uncle was a boy, they put most of their money into educating him. And so he went away to school in Ohio to go to school. My mother was the second born. And so they still had some money. She went up the hill to Howard University, and that's where she met my dad. She had a younger sister, Alice. They didn't have too much money by the time she came along. So she went to what's now known as DC Teachers. I forget what it used to be called. But it was two very different backgrounds. Here in Montclair, even though the schools were actually integrated technically, they were not really integrated because they were segregated as a de jure segregation, because they were neighborhood schools. And as neighborhood schools, since the schools, because of redlining, were segregated, the schools were segregated also. And so
by the time you went to school, were the magnet schools in place then? No, you were still going to the fifth grade school.
Yeah. They were not, by the time I came, they closed one of the schools, one of the elementary schools. It was one where, one of the things that people will find out that I grew up in Montclair, they asked me, how did Montclair change? And it has changed drastically. They didn't just segregate because of race, but also nationality and religion. You know, the Italians lived on the south end of town, but on the other side of, Lincoln Street. And they used to go to, I don't know if you know where Nicolo's is. That building across the street used to be where the Italians went to go to school. And they closed that school. And so some of the Italians came to Nishnaway, which is why Bobby DiPaolo wound up at Nishnaway School. He was one of the few white kids at Nishnaway. Montclair has changed.
When you were a kid, you told me that there were places you knew you couldn't go.
Yeah. And some of it might not have been out there, there weren't signs colored only, but we just knew we weren't supposed to be going there. And James Susquehanna and I graduated from high school together. And when we were coordinating our 50th high school reunion, she was talking about, the wonderful memories I had at Bond, going to Bond's ice cream. I said, I never went because I knew I wasn't supposed to be there.
What did you know?
Yeah, thank you. She's a little bit older than I am. So and I only know because I talked to her before, and you knew the older brother of one of my classmates, and her brother was 9 years older than we are, Bobby Klein. And we just knew we weren't supposed to go there. And, you know, you didn't even go. And one of the things that came up in the planning of our 50th reunion was that a white classmate of ours who was dating a black guy, your brother, Ronnie Bird. Yeah. And she said, we used to go there all the time. But Ronnie was, yeah, and I figured that would have to be it. But I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. and when they were talking about Tierney's. Now, Tierney's is a double-edged sword, because I never did drink, and so I had no sense of going there anyway. But, you know, again, it was someplace that I knew that I would be. And, you know, to be this flourishing, diverse town that it is now is completely foreign to me. I like it, and I think it's wonderful, because there was so much that was missed, like my father. If it had stayed the way it was, it was only by happenstance that my father happened to be in a position to become what he became. And that's the problem with not giving folks a chance, is that you leave a talent like my father's, and it's just never discovered. But
tell us, yeah, your father was certainly,
yes,
I mean, he played a big role, as did your mother, actually, in Montclair history.
Yeah.
So let's hear about that.
When my dad, when he was growing up in Montclair, again, partially because of this relationship that he had with Frank Thompson Jr., he had decided that he wanted to go to medical school and come back to Montclair and practice medicine. And he wanted to be, the way the hospitals were set up at the time, they were set up so that Black physicians could not admit their own patients to the hospital. They had to turn their patients over to a white physician. So it was part of what he wanted to do, was to make it possible for Black physicians to be hired, not hired, but so they
Admitting privileges, is that what it is?
Yeah, they weren't allowing Black physicians to do that. And that was in the mid 1940s. And my father, working along with an organization called American CBU, ACV. I can't remember what it was. It's American Veterans Council or something like that. And they were an organization for veterans, and it was billed as being more liberal than the American Legion and Veterans of Foreign Wars. And they had as their mission to help veterans who were physicians overcome some of these obstacles. So working with that organization and the NAACP here in Montclair, they eventually got to the point where Black physicians could admit under courtesy privileges to the hospitals here in Montclair. There were 3 hospitals at that time. There was Mountainside, which is still here now. Well, it's still Mountainside. There was also Community Hospital and St. Vincent's. And none of those hospitals allowed Black physicians to admit to their hospital. When he came back in 1946, he petitioned to be allowed to admit his patients to Mountainside Hospital and to 2 other hospitals. And it had to go through some changes, but eventually he and Dr. Thornhill, who was about, from what I can gather, about 25, 30 years older than my dad, they were about courtesy privileges at Mountainside Hospital. And I came across an article that was in either the Montclair Times or the Star Ledger. And when they announced it, there was always there was a little. The article didn't say that they were kind of pressured to do it, and there was just some gibberish in the article, trying to almost forgive what they had done in the past.
This was in the 40s, did you say?
46. Well, 48 is when he got.
That's really significantly. I was in Chicago for a long period of time, and my husband was working with a student at the University of Chicago, and Black people were dying in ambulances because hospitals wouldn't admit them. And that was in the 60s.
Well, Black patients could be admitted, but their own doctors could take care of it.
Were they segregated in the hospital?
That I don't remember. Yes, I don't know.
No, I was just curious because my experience was like shocking when,
I don't know. You mentioned Chicago, right? I should mention that my dad was he did his internship at Providence Hospital in Chicago. He did his residency at Freedman's Hospital in DC. But every promotion that he got at Mountainside Hospital, he had to jump through a bunch of hoops. It wasn't enough that he had met the requirements to become a full attending, but he had to submit them and submit them and submit them and submit them. And fast forward 45 years or so, when I became a full attending at Mountainside Hospital, when I graduated medical school at the age of 40, I went to Mountainside, and I did my residency at Mountainside. So I went to Mountainside and did my interview, and no problems. And I think I had to apply for my first internship. My first promotion. After that, I would get a letter maybe every 18 months or so saying that I had gotten to the next level of whatever you want to call it. And simply because I had done the requisite number of admissions or consultations, where with my father, it was a lot different. And I can remember to this day, and I still have the letter. I was surprised that I still had it. But the letter that I got when I became a full attending happened after my dad, and very, very shortly after my dad had died. They had made the decision. The letter was dated in January of 1995. My dad died in February 1995. The letter was dated in January of 95, and it said that they had met December of 96, and I had been promoted to full attending at that point. And I can remember getting the letter, opening it in my office, which we had a home office. And Mom was in the kitchen doing the dishes. And I walked into the kitchen and I said, "You won't believe what this letter says." And it said that I had been promoted to full attending. Again, simply because I had done the requisite number of admissions and consultations, no BS. Just because I had done what I was supposed to do. And by that time, I had stopped doing hospital work. I did not like doing hospital work. Some of my most impactful experiences happened when I was doing inpatient work, but inpatient work just took, it was back before electronic records. And if you wanted to look at the x-ray, you had to go to radiology. If you wanted the blood work results, you had to go. So that if you're doing an office-based practice, it was just very inefficient. And by the time I got to become a full attending, I had stopped doing admission. And I was still a full attending, but I just wasn't doing admissions. I would still do consultation. And I can remember telling my colleagues, fellow family medicine physicians, that I wasn't going to be doing any more admission. I got somebody else to do it for me. And I was sort of chastised. I was supposed to be taking care of patients with radiating. I said, yeah, I'll go right ahead and do that. And I said, I want to do office-based medicine. And which is now the standard of care now. We have hospitalist and office-based medicine. But I really didn't like, the idea that, having to get up in the middle of the night to go, or even if somebody was stable, you have to, since I didn't like particularly doing hospital work, I would maybe have 2 or 3 patients in the hospital a month. And to take time out to go see those patients, again, is not, things are done a lot more efficiently now. And if you get an admission in the middle of the night, you gotta get up and go. I didn't like it. But that's that.
What about your mom? I mean,
Mom?
you said that she has some significant
history
too.
Yes. She grew up in DC, and
did she tell you much about what that was like?
Well, the difference with Mom's upbringing was that even though the schools in DC were segregated, she went to Montclair High School. I don't know if any of you know anything about DC.
Very famous high school.
Yes, it is. And she used to say that, yes, they were separate schools, but they were equal. So the white high school had, because it was managed by the Congress, which is, thank God, not the Congress of now. If the white high school had a swimming pool, so did the black one. And the other difference was the teachers at the black high schools, or the black schools, were black. The principals of the black high schools were black. At Montclair, they didn't have any white teachers. I mean, any black teachers. You didn't see anybody who, if you were a black kid, you didn't see anybody who looked like you other than the other black kids. I don't even remember if the custodians were black. But Mom got to see a black person can be adopted. A black person can be adopted. They can be a teacher. They can be a principal. They can be a minister. They can be things other than somebody working in somebody else's house. And Dad didn't see that, and that was the other difference. But Mom graduated from Howard University with a degree in home economics. She really did love sewing, but she knew that if she wanted to make a living, she was going to have to go into education. So that's what she did. She did home education. She taught in Asheville, North Carolina, and she taught in Baltimore also before she came to Montclair. She was doing that. My dad was, when he finished his residency, he World War II had started, and rather than taking a chance on being drafted, he enlisted so that he could go in as a doctor. And he was in Liberia for 3 years from April of 1945, then 40, but from about June of 40 until April of 45. And they had decided to go on and get married. They had briefly thought about getting married after he came back from the war, but Dad said, well, if something happens to me and I don't come back, if you're my widow, then you can get benefits and whatnot. Whereas if you're my fiance, you're not going to get anything. So they got married here, April 4th, 1942, and that's their 50th anniversary there. Have I been talking to the mic all this time?
Yes.
Okay. It sounds different now all of a sudden.
Better.
Yeah. But they got married April 4th, 1942, and he went to basic training shortly after that. And then I guess by June or July of 42, he went over to Liberia, and he was there for a little over 3 years. Then he came back, and then he came to Montclair.
They came back in what, 1940? He was back in 1945?
He was back in 1945.
And you were born in 1946?
I'm a baby boomer. I am the basis, the first of the baby boomers.
First, yeah.
Yeah, D-Day was June 1945. I came June 13th, 1946.
Wow. More back to your mom though. What did she when she came to
when she came to Montclair? I had been born. I was 6 weeks old, and we moved over to 160 Lincoln Street. And she pretty much, even though she had an infant at home, she applied to become a teacher because that's what she had done. She had done that for several years before. And she applied and went for the interview. And when they saw that she was Black, excuse me, she didn't get back. She didn't hear back from them. So rather than just sitting around, she went, and over the next few years, she got her master's in education from what is now Kane University. And my brother was born about 3 years after I was born. From what I read, Mabel Hudson became the first Black teacher that Montclair hired the same year that I was born, 1946. And Mom was hired at Sames in 1956. By that time, she had her master's. And she started what is now Glenfield School. It was a junior high at the time. And she went on to George Ennis and subsequently to the high school, where she was head of the home economics department. She was probably the second or third Black teacher that Montclair hired.
So she wasn't the first.
She was not the first. No, she was not the first. Mabel Hudson was the first.
But there weren't, presumably, there were few compared to what you just said about kids not seeing anybody.
No, but Mabel Hudson taught at Glenfield School. And I went to Nishnaway. That's a story in and of itself. And so I would not have had Mabel, and because I was in Nishnaway.
Why was Nishnaway a story in itself? What do you mean? Because
the way the men lied, the way the houses were sold, Lincoln Street was a dividing line, and I was at 160 Lincoln Street, and going through my father's history, apparently the family owned a house at 151 Lincoln Street at one point in time, which I did not know. But it was sort of kind of clicked with me that that's probably how he knew that the other side of Lincoln Street went to Glenfield, which is where he went. And the even side of Lincoln Street went to Nishnaway. So he wanted, and Frank Thompson Jr. lived on, I don't think he lived on Lincoln Street, but he lived on that side of town. The professional Black folk, the doctors, the dentists, the ministers, and whatnot, lived on whatever that side of the street is, the even side of Lincoln Street on.
Which was your side or not?
Which was my side. When he came back to Montclair after the war, he said that he wanted his house to be on the even side of Lincoln Street because he wanted his kids to go to the Nishnaway school. Houses on the other side of the street would not do. And so we've been at 160 Lincoln Street ever since.
Wow, that's the story. Now, how about you? Can we talk a little bit about you? I know you grew up there.
Yeah.
You sort of like, when I met Elaine briefly at the History Center, we got a chance to talk a little bit, but I kept trying to get more information from you about childhood and what it was like. You talked about Jack and Jill.
Yes.
A lot.
Yes.
How was that significant in your life?
Jack and Jill, for those of you is an organization of Black moms, for the most part, who want their kids to have friends who have children with similar aspects to them. So it would be the Black physicians, doctors, lawyers, that kind of stuff. And they plan parties, activities for the kids. And Mom was actually one of the charter members of the North Jersey Jack and Jill chapter. It was a way for the kids to meet other kids whose parents, so that they could have the same kind of experience that my father had with Frank Jr.
Well, what kinds of things did you do? What made it so much fun?
There were parties, just getting together and meeting the kids whose parents did the same kind of stuff that your parents did. Now, it was a great organization for people like me who were in it from the time they were very young. When I moved back to Montclair, and I thought about joining Jack and Jill and getting my daughter to do it, it was a very different thing. Because I moved back here when she was getting ready to start high school. And to come into Jack and Jill when your kid is in high school, when you're in high school, when you're a kid in high school, it's not the same as growing up. I mean, I still have a few friends who are still alive, who are in Jack and Jill with me. And actually, Frank Thompson Jr. had a son, Frank Thompson III, who was in my high school class. He was one of the ones who was in Jack and Jill with me. And there were other folks that I knew from around town.
Well, it was a different era, too, when you were doing it compared to when your daughter might have.
Yeah.
So how did you become a music teacher with a father who's this physician who's got creds like crazy?
When I was in high school, maybe even junior high, I had taken accordion lessons and piano lessons when I was younger. And then when I decided I really like music and I want to do something serious because I was taking accordion, I said, accordion is not the way to go. And
why did you choose accordion? How did you even find an accordion?
Because my cousin BJ made the accordion. And one of the other things about my family is that I had one brother, but I had a bunch of cousins who we all grew up together. And there were nine of us between the ages of my brother was born in 1949. My oldest cousin was born in 1942, the same year my parents were married, and there were 9 of us. And we all hung out at my house during the summer. And so there were a bunch of us. And I forget where I was going.
Well, we're talking about the accordion and your...
So my cousin BJ was the oldest cousin who lived in Montclair. She was a year and a half or so older than I am. And she played the accordion and I just loved it. And so I started taking accordion lessons also. I don't know if anybody here knew my cousin BJ, Betty Mills. Yeah. So that's where I got the accordion. And then when I said, I really think I might want to do something with music, I said, accordion is not really the way to go. I mean, Lawrence Welk is okay. What instrument am I going to play? And so I decided on the flute because it was small. It's in the band and the orchestra.
Girls play it.
Girls play the flute, yes. And so I played the flute. And I kind of was good for it. I mean, I good at it, I should say. According to, we're talking about Montclair. We're not talking about a great music place. And by the time I got to high school, I was fairly decent. I played in the orchestra. I practiced a lot, and got fairly decent. And eventually became the first chair. And I was like, hey, I'm not shit. When I applied to colleges, I didn't actually know what I wanted to do. I didn't know.
Where did you go to college? I
I
forgot.
went to Syracuse University, which is where I met my daughter's father.
And had you decided upon entering that that's what you wanted to do?
That is how I wound up at Syracuse, because I talked about Oberlin and my uncle. I applied to Oberlin College and was accepted. I applied to Syracuse and was accepted. And what I told my parents was, if I go to Oberlin, I'll get a bachelor. I don't even know what I was going to get a bachelor's degree in. If I go to Syracuse, then I'll get a music degree. And they said, well, why don't you go to Oberlin? Because Oberlin had a combination music education and bachelor's degree. But I said, even though I knew I was pretty big stuff in Montclair, I knew that I was not even Oberlin music ed department. So that's how I wound up at Syracuse.
I don't know that that's really true, though. I'm curious. I wonder what would have happened if you went to Oberlin. No. Somebody said that, and I know it said that life is a series of accidents,
They're just,
don't know.
yeah. Yeah, you close one door and another one opens up. Which in a way kind of takes me to my second career, because I did a few teaching. I taught,
Where were you at this time? Where did you start teaching?
my first job was in Madison Township, New Jersey. My husband at the time, Dawn's father, was getting his master's degree at Rutgers. And this was in 1967-68. He graduated in 1967. I graduated in 1968 from Syracuse. And actually, another Syracuse alum, he graduated with me, Dr. Howard Wilson, who, needless to say, I didn't know him at Syracuse. Syracuse is a huge school, and I didn't find out that we had graduated together until I met him again, and we wound up both working at Vanguard Medical Group. And then we graduated the same year. That blew my mind. But anyway, my husband was finishing his master's degree, and we had gotten married in 1968, and he had another year before he had a commitment to the Air Force, because he was in ROTC in undergraduate school. That's how he paid for school. So during that year, where after we were married, the first year we were married, I taught in Madison Township. And then 1968, for those of you who were around, there was a little thing going on called the Vietnam War. And he was in ROTC, so he had a commitment to, a 4-year commitment to the Air Force. And he had an assignment where he would have been reported to Vietnam like within 6 weeks. And somehow or another, he came to the attention, Dawn's father, Rick is his name, to the attention of folks at the Air Force Academy. And they were looking to diversify their faculty. And so they said, we would like for you to come teach at the Air Force Academy. And he said, really? And he said, but I have the orders cut to go to Vietnam. And the man's name was Colonel Taylor. I could not tell you Colonel Taylor's first name. If you put a gun to my head, but his name was Colonel Taylor. And he said, don't you worry about it. And within a matter of a few weeks, if not days, he had orders to go to the Air Force Academy to teach what he was.
Where is the Air Force Academy?
Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs, which is where my daughter was born. He taught at the Air Force Academy. He had a 4-year commitment to the ROTC. He had a 4-year tour of duty to the Air Force Academy. He came out of the Air Force during the Vietnam War, never having to go to Vietnam. And
What did you do during that time?
during that time, I taught for about a year and a half. Then we decided it was time to become a parent. And my daughter was born at the Air Force Academy.
Not at the Air Force Academy.
The Air Force Academy Hospital.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
one of the Air Force Academy. The bill came to $10, $2.50 a day. The best $10 I ever spent in my life. And so I was a stay-at-home mom for about 2.5 years. We were at the Air Force Academy. We finished there in 1973. And that's when we came back to Jersey, not the final time. We came to Jersey.
You came back here with your infant daughter?
Yeah. And my husband.
Well, yeah. Why did you come back?
He was working on his PhD by that time. And I was going to work, I was going to teach. And my parents said, no, you are not going to be putting your husband through school and then have him decide to get a new wife. You were going to go to school also. So I applied. I chose GREs probably years before for something else, and did poorly. I do not take standardized tests well. I do not test well. And so when we got
was it filmed?
that, it would have been 1973 that we were at Rutgers. And so I looked around Rutgers to see what kind of a master's degree could I get without having to take a GRE. And social studies education it was. I really enjoyed working for that degree. I really enjoyed it. It was one of the few times in my life where I felt that I was where I belong. I mean, Syracuse, like I said, I kind of felt because even though I chose music education, I felt it was a little bit over my head. I felt it was, oh God, I don't belong here. But at Rutgers, I really felt, okay, this is it. I can hang here. And he got his PhD. I got my master's in 75. He had a job in Denver teaching at University of Colorado. I forget where he taught. Doesn't matter. He was teaching on the college level. And we moved to Denver with Dawn, of course. I taught music there for 2.5 years. And again, we get to another one of those instances where sort of fate comes in. I had started teaching in the middle of the year in January at the opening of a new school in a vastly predominantly white school district. I was the only Black teacher in the school. There were 6 Black kids in the school. And yeah, I didn't play piano well, but I still taught instrumental and vocal music, and was doing well. You know, the principal liked what I was doing, gave me very good recommendations, evaluations, I should say. And that went on for about 2 years. And then in the middle of the second year, 2.5 years, he decided to have a retreat for the faculty. By this time, the principal. By this time, Dawn's father and I had divorced. he decided to have this retreat for the faculty. And the retreat, it was a weekend retreat. And even though my ex-husband and I both lived in Denver, and we had a cordial relationship, but I always looked forward to my weekends with my daughter, and just, her and I. And because I'd be busy during the week, teaching and whatnot. And so when he told us about this retreat, I said, I can't go. And he said, why not? And I said, because it's my weekend with my daughter. And he said, well, can't you get your ex-husband to take care of her? And I said, but it's my weekend with my daughter. And he said, I want you to come to this meeting, this retreat. And I said, I don't want to. I want to spend the weekend with my daughter. And so what had been a very cordial relationship between me and him turned on a dime. My evaluations from she is very innovative in the way she teaches and all this other kind of stuff, to not very flattering evaluations. And I knew before the year was over that I was not going to be rehired. I didn't have tenure. So you don't really need a reason to not renew, not to hire somebody if they're not on tenure. And so I knew that I wasn't going to get that job. I knew I wasn't going to get tenure. So I had been thinking about medicine when I was getting my master's degree, but thought, I'm really kind of too old at the age of 27.
You've had medicine in your background for so long. And just now, this is sort of...
It wasn't just then. It had been sort of growing, even while I was getting my master's degree.
Okay.
Because one of the best places to study, I got my master's degree at Rutgers in New Brunswick, was the Library of Science and Medicine. And so I was reading the things there. I was reading my father's journals. And so it'd been this sort of simmering. And I just sort of said, I'm too old to go to medical school.
And how old were you?
27. Looking back, I was a child. When I got to this point where I knew I wasn't going to have a job, and I had a choice to make, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was thinking, okay, I don't know. I got a call from my mom, and my dad had a heart attack when I was 10. And obviously he recovered. And she was calling me to tell me that my dad had another heart attack and he was going to have bypass surgery. And this was in the late 70s. A bypass surgery is a big deal whenever it's done. But in the late 1970s, it was a really big deal. And because I was the kind of teacher that I was, I hadn't used my sick leave. I hadn't used a lot of personal leave. I was in Denver. Mom and Dad were here. And when Mom told me that he was going to have his surgery, I told them that I was going to go back and be with my mom and my dad. And if my dad wasn't going to make it, I was going to be with him when he died. And I left my daughter with her father. And I came back and I was with my mom and my dad when he had his surgery. Coming back again, my dad obviously survived the surgery. And one of the things that I talked about in my essays for medical school was a thing that happened when my dad was on the mend from this surgery. I had gone to the hospital to see my dad, as I did every day. And I went this particular day. Mom wasn't there in the room. But you remember hearing about Frank Thompson and Frank Thompson Jr. and Frank Thompson III. I had gone in, Frank Thompson III, who was my classmate, I'd gone to see my dad. And he had just gotten to the point where he was feeling he still had tubes and whatnot hanging all over him, but he was feeling better. And Frank Thompson III, we call him Tommy, Tommy looked at my dad and said, "So you're going to retire?" And he said, "No." And he said, "Why aren't you going to retire?" And he said, "I love medicine." And the way he said it, and the twinkle in his eye when he said it. And I said, okay, I'm 33 at the time, maybe 32. I can't remember where it was. It was probably 32 because it hadn't been my birthday yet. And I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it now. And if I don't do it now, it's just not going to happen. And I said, yeah, you're old. But I said, I feel like I've got to try. I don't want to be 50 and wonder could I have done it. So I decided pretty much then that I would at least try. And Dad got better, thank God. When I worked at the nerve to tell my parents that I wanted to do this, I thought, oh my God, what are my parents going to think? You know, here they've got this daughter, and, you know, she has an undergraduate degree, she has a master's degree, and now she wants to go for a medical degree. And I was really kind of not looking forward to telling them because I didn't know what they were going to say. And I was afraid, oh my God, they were going to say, when are you finally going to get a job? And I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was. But they both said, they were on the phone together. They both said, whatever we can do, we will help. And they couldn't, and they said, we can't do as much as we could because I was 33. So they were in their 60s. And Dad was kind of winding down his practice because they had been, you know, they had helped me so much in my undergraduate degree and my master's degree but they weren't in a situation where they could help, you know, significantly. But, you know, whatever we can do, we're going to do. And, you know, my father tried to tell me when I was in high school, you really ought to go into medicine. I want to get married and have kids. But, you know, I did get married and I had a fantastic kid. And I'm actually kind of glad I did it that way because being an older student in medical school, you know, a lot of women going into medicine, they have to decide, when am I going to have a family? I had already been there, done that. And granted, it was probably tough on I know it was tough on my daughter, but at least at that part of my life, you know, I wasn't worrying about making any more babies.
Were there many people in medical school who were as old as you?
I was the oldest in my class. However, I went to the University of Colorado, and the average age of my medical school class was 26, which is unusual. When I was...
Is that usually old, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, because it's usually... I mean, I was 36 when I started. There was another 36-year-old, and she and I were, you know, we went through pre-med together. And, you know, I don't know how exactly we met, but somehow we met during pre-med, and we are friends still. We are good friends to this day. So we were at that end of the spectrum. And then there was one kid who was 19. But most of the kids in my class, my medical school class, had done other things before medicine. And I actually don't think that's not a bad idea. Because it's a good idea, in my opinion. Now, granted, I'm biased. There's some other life experience, especially when you're trying to relate to issues.
You got your degree, you were 40, you said?
I was 40, yeah.
And did you practice it all there, or did you come right back to Montclair?
I did my residency, again, it wasn't by choice. I wanted to do my residency in Denver so that Dawn, my daughter, to stay in Denver and finish a high school education there. I didn't match in Denver. I matched at Mountainside. And actually, it was a blessing in disguise because it brought me back. Because my intent when I went into medicine was always to come back to Montclair.
Was your dad still practicing?
Yes.
So you were practicing with him when you came to?
Yes, yes. And my father actually got to hood me for my, graduation from medical school.
Wonderful.
I came back. I did my residency, and actually there were some patients that I took care of during my residency that I continued to see, once I became a practicing solo physician. And one of the things about the Douglas practice is that we took care of folks for extended periods of time. A patient that we shared is here today, Ella Anderson, and she's she's in her 90s. And my dad started seeing her when she was in her mid-20s. And when I was taking care of a patient at Vanguard, I also took care of her before I went to Vanguard. She's a couple years younger than I am. And when I saw her at Vanguard, she said, your father delivered me, didn't you? And I said, no, I did not. So she had a Dr. Douglas, she didn't see him as a pediatrician.
You practiced with your dad until you retired?
Right, just for a few years.
Yeah.
And he really just held on to the practice
Really?
to hand it over to me.
Right. And how long did you practice completely before you retired in 2023?
But I started in...
I'm not good at the math.
I'm not either. I started in 89, so whatever.
Okay. We can let them figure that out.
Yeah. 34? Thank you. 34 years.
Wow. Well, this has been, I didn't really think we were going to get through all this in the time we had allotted to us, because Elaine's life has been so fascinating and so different, and there's so many aspects of it. It has been a wonderful experience for me.
Nice talking to you.
That don't know anything about you at all, and I've enjoyed it tremendously. You've been absolutely terrific. This has been so interesting, and I thank you so much for getting through your entire very complicated life.
It's been complicated. Thank you. Is I gonna think of it? Oh.
We are going to open it up for questions and comments, whether it's Zoom or in person. So what I'll do is, if you have something you'd like to ask or say, I'll come around with a microphone, and as I see hands.
Well, Doctor, did I hear you mention a Dr. Cornfield?
Thornhill. Thornhill.
Oh, Thornhill.
Thornhill. Yeah, he came on staff at the same time as my dad. But as I mentioned, he was a good 30 years older than Dad, so he never became a full attending. I mentioned, I think briefly, that my dad was the first black physician to become a full attending at Mountainside. I believe that I am the first black female, some 45 years later. Now there are many there are all kinds of different types of physicians at Mountainside now, but it used to be white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males, and it's a very, I don't even know most of the people there now.
Elaine, I forgot to ask you, were there many women in your med school class?
There were, I can't remember, it was not unusual. There was at least a third, I would say that the class was female. I was the only black that graduated in my class. There was a young black man, he was one of the younger ones in my class. He took off a year to take care of his mom. And he came back the following year to, so he graduated a year behind me. But he did finish.
But this was the era when women were just beginning to become MDs. I mean, I knew men in the State Department who were terrified when they had to go get their physical exam and said, it's a woman doctor.
Yeah, I mean, this was in the in the 80s. I don't know. I mean, it was somewhat unusual. I think there's probably more women than men now.
Well, now, yeah.
Yeah. But there were. It wasn't that unusual.
One other quick question, Doctor. Do you ever remember your father talking about woman doctor, Dr. Smith from Vauxhall? She was the one who delivered me.
Oh my God, no. I don't remember him talking about any Black females. And when I became a full attending at Mountainside, I asked the folks in the medical staff office, I asked around the hospital, have there been any other Black females? There were Black females who became full attendings shortly after me and were a lot more active. Because like I said, I wasn't even doing hospital medicine when I became a full attending at Mountainside. But they came after I did. And
okay, but she would have been.
Oh yeah, she would have been good.
She delivered me.
Yeah, so she would have been before me.
So this would have been your father might have been in her peer group, or he might have known something about it. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, he did not mention her. Yeah.
I also should have clarified for anyone on Zoom, if you have a question, type it in the chat and we'll read that out for you. There's also this room, anyone would like to. You can also share if you'd like to just say something, if you have a question. Okay, so here, and I'm going to comment back.
Elaine. So I wonder, I'm going back to your high school years in Montclair, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of segregation, there was the YMCA. I had worked for the YMCA, which was Black Y.
Okay.
And then the one on Washington Street, which was
the one that.
Oh, the other one on West.
Washington Street was the Black Y, and the big one.
The Y on Greenwich Avenue? No, YW. I'm sorry, YW.
Oh, okay.
So, can you talk a little about your experience of growing up in a segregated town? Like, for example, you couldn't swim in the same swimming pools, and was your education at Montclair High as good as any education of any other person there? I'm interested in those years in some ways, if you want to talk about it.
So far as my years at Montclair High, which is going to bring up something else, the Montclair was, in a way, somewhat like it was with my dad, because I was a kid of Dr. Douglas and Mrs. Douglas. My dad was my dad, and my mother had been teaching in Montclair. I was one of those kids who was, put in the right track. And it wasn't just a passive thing, because my parents were involved with both me and my brother. And one of the things that I like to mention is that Montclair, you might have been in the proper track, but let's take the National Honor Society. There was a Black valedictorian who graduated in either 60 or 61, Maryland, or I can't remember if her first name was Marion or Marilyn. Her last name was Tyndall. She was a valedictorian. She was not in the National Honor Society because there was a part of the requisition, that you went through this process. It wasn't just your grade point and what you did. You could be literally blackballed anonymously by any faculty member. And so she was valedictorian because she had the grade points. But because somebody along the way had blackballed her, she wasn't in the National Honor Society. And my parents and others said, hey, what's going on with this? So even though there were kids who were smarter than me, before I came around, Sharon Miller, who is still in town, and I were the first Blacks to be in the National Honor Society. Because by that time, with pressure, it was merit-based. So even the makeup of so much is different in at the high school now versus what it was back then. When I was coming up, there was a Black twirler, me. There was a Black dancer. I think it was Diane. It was either Leonard Chavies was one of them, and Diane Robinson was the other one. But Glenda was the cheerleader, I think, and Diane Robinson was a dancer. It could be more than one, and of course it's very different now. So if you with some pushing, you were you got to where you needed to be, and this it's so different now. I'm thinking about this doesn't have to do with Montclair necessarily, but the National Medical Association is the organization that was founded by Black physicians to because the Black physicians weren't allowed to join the American Medical Association, so we started our own one in 1895 called the National Medical Association, and that kind of thing was happening. So
I saw a hand up before, and then I'll come back to you.
I don't have a question. So my name is Deanne Green, and I've been your patient for, I'm sure if you look in the files, it's over 20 years. Probably
yeah.
around
Yeah. I don't have the files.
there are other people who there are other people who've been your patient for a long time. I don't have a question. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for just your impact-filled career and your service to this community and the extended community. I don't live in Montclair. I'm over in West Orange. But one thing that I always found remarkable about you is how much time you took with each of your patients. That is something that we don't get today.
And that's partially the way the system is now.
Yes, and that's something. But you took time.
But the other thing is that being self-employed, I was able to.
Yes.
And then when I became employed, because I was part-time, I wasn't pressured to see folks quickly. It's different now. It's different now. But I really, believe me, I thought long and hard about retiring because I really did love what I did. And I still miss it. I'm glad I'm not doing it. I still miss it. I miss my patients, let's put it that way. And I'm very fortunate that I was in a position to be able to take the time with my patients. I met the spouse of one of my patients, Carol here, and I can remember, how much her husband talked about her. And I'm thrilled that I had the opportunity to do that. And it's been now, granted, I never made a lot of money, but I really did love what I did. And is that my little grandson? Yeah. You got back from his practice. No, that's my grandson Miles over there. And he had baseball practice, and I'm glad he could make it. And my son-in-law John, just come out and say, just leave. Well, I guess he's not. But
pass the mic. But the last thing I wanted to say is, not many people run to see their doctors. But I used to look forward to coming in, seeing you, and just chatting about everything. So thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Right back. What happened there? Right.
Elaine and I work
Good,
in the orchestra together. I just wanted to add another side, not the blessing that you had with your parents and the ability to do what you did in high school. One of our other classmates, or within a year or so, Lydia Barrett, went from Glenfield, top of her class in Glenfield, and was placed in the home ec strain, and her father filed a D6 suit and won, and that's why we have a MAC. That's why, fast forward, 1976, the solution that Montclair eventually came up with was the magnet system to desegregate the schools.
But I didn't hear what you said. The solution that Montclair finally came up with was what?
To create a magnet system, rather than neighborhood schools. So there was a lawsuit in '68, and what? No. Yeah, there's a movie on the Montclair PTA website that is really wonderful. Shows Carol Willis and Jean Kidd were driving. It wasn't the superintendent. It was these two women who went down to Trenton and beat the bushes, and they made it happen. Wonderful, wonderful people.
You gotta get your exercise in today.
You made it. Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello.
Put it up there.
I can't say.
Put the mic up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't say that Dr. Douglas did not save my life. Because I did everything, went everywhere, and did everything I should be doing it. I'm not by myself in here. But when I went to her office, I was in a good place, for myself. I had children and whatnot, and I left home and this and that. But when she went to her father first, and he was nice, and then I ended up with Dr. Douglas. And I really appreciate it because, honest to God, you saved my life. You did. You did. I went to college and everything. And
that was Dad.
No, that was somebody. That was you. But anyway, I really appreciate what you did for me. You saved my life. And I don't have too far to go for my life to end, but I had to tell you that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a Zoom question. So we just sneak in here. You can say that.
All right, we got one question and one comment on Zoom. So one question is from Melissa Schaefer. This is a deep one, so brace yourself, Elaine. What do you miss most about Montclair of the past, and what do you wish Montclair would provide now that is missing?
So far as what do I miss from the past, you'll have to repeat the second part again. So far as what I miss from the past, I live currently on the street that I grew up on. And the street that I grew up on was inhabited by Black folk. I have wonderful neighbors. I really do. Some of them are here. And I am extremely fortunate that even though I couldn't afford to live in this town at this stage of the game, I am very fortunate that, the neighborhood is very different than what it was, but it is still a great neighborhood. And like I said, because my family, my daughter, my son-in-law, and grandson are with me, I can still be in the house that I grew up in.
How is the neighborhood different than what it was?
It's integrated. And because it was the Black neighborhood. But the neighbors that we have are really, really great. But it's gotten a lot more expensive to live, a lot more expensive. And even if I had all the money in the world, I wouldn't be able to logistically manage because the house has 3 stories to it, and it just wouldn't make sense. But it's really, really great that my daughter and her family are there with me now. And what was the other part of the question?
The second question was, and what do you wish Montclair would provide now that is missing?
That's a tough one to go because that's where you're going to get into all the politics of things. And some of the things that probably AIM is dealing with. There's something that's a little more affordable. There are people here who would have liked to have lived in Montclair and aged in place in Montclair, but can't afford it. So affordability would be the things with that.
All right, and then the one comment that came in was from your cousin Myrtle, aka Terry.
Terry, yeah.
She said, "Well done."
Let me just say a little bit about my cousin Myrtle. She is not technically by blood a cousin, but the family, even going back in the generations, they have sort of looked out for each other. My cousin Gloria is here. She is one of the 2 daughters of my father's youngest brother. She's one of those 9 that were born between 42 and whatever. We were really like sisters. We're like siblings. And Myrtle's father, Myrtle's mother and Gloria's mother were sisters. And when Myrtle's father died, when he left, it was just Myrtle, her sister, and mother, and she. The mother died, Aunt Louise's sister. Neither sister, gosh, it gets confusing. Myrtle's mother had 2 sisters, Gloria's mother, and another sister. The 2 girls went with each of the surviving sister. I hope this is making sense. It makes perfect sense to me. But the other sister, Debbie, went to live with, what did you say? Yeah. Nora. And Myrtle came and lived with Aunt Louise and Uncle Norby. So she became, even though she's not related by blood, she is our cousin, just like all the rest of us. And she graduated from Montclair High School after I did in 65, I guess. And so she is very much, my cousin.
Thank you. I saw another hand, so I'm going to come around that side.
It's getting chilly.
Thank
you. 2 comments. First of all, this was amazing. That you've had like so many careers. Can you tell me your name, please? Oh, I'm sorry, Gail Britton. I moved to Montclair from New York City 37 years ago. Finally, I'm selling the only house I lived in. But this was amazing, and your career was amazing. But the thing I wanted to comment about, we were talking about how Montclair has changed. And when I first moved to this town, one of the things I loved about it was that it was not only racially diverse, it was also economically diverse. And now we don't have that economic diversity. My daughter would bring home playmates, and sometimes one child's parents were janitors or teachers or attorneys. You don't see that anymore. And I really feel like we lost the soul of this town because we lack that full-fledged diversity. But I just wanted to thank you for what you and your dad did for this town and for children when they see you sitting in that chair and when they saw him sitting in that chair. You have to see what you want to be in life. You don't see it.
That's what I think the thing is. That was the advantage that my mother had, growing up in DC, that Dad didn't have when he was growing up. And I know that my parents were very, very impactful in this town. I can remember shortly after my mom died, going to CVS on Claremont. This was back before self-checkout and whatnot. And you actually knew the cashiers and whatnot. And I had gone to pay for something, and I used the credit card. And I must have said something to the cashier. And she looked at me, and she looked at my name, and she said, "Are you Mrs. Douglas's daughter?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Oh, she was the best teacher I ever had." And this was shortly after she died. I completely lost it. I managed to get to my car first, but she said, "I heard your voice, and then I see your name." And she said, "I wondered if you were related to her." And I said, "That was my mom." And I miss them both. I consider myself extremely, extremely lucky to have had the parents that I've had. And consider myself very, very fortunate in that respect. And, also with my lovely daughter, a grandson who's sitting over there doing, "Oh, my boss is still here." I consider myself extremely fortunate. And I should also say that I consider myself fortunate in that I was able to find a company that I was able to work for and give me the opportunity to extend my career for a few more years. That they were a good fit for me. And I would not, if I had stayed in private practice, I would have had to stop immediately from March of 2020. And it would have been, I could not have done telemedicine. I could not have, I would have had to shut down immediately because it was a home office. And I consider myself extremely, extremely lucky and fortunate to have had the careers and, this has really been great. A lot of you folks I know, and some of you I don't quite recognize, but it's been really great.
Thank you.
I have one last question here.
Oh,
when you came in this evening, you said you were a little nervous.
yeah.
How do you feel now?
Right now I'm cold.
We all are.
Yeah.
I'm sort of shivering here. I'm sure my voice is still shaky because I'm kind of shivering. And
are you nervous anymore? No.
I'm still nervous because
You did such a great job.
I'm nervous more because I'm nervous simply because I feel that I'm just sort of, and I'm glad I did it. I didn't say all the things. I didn't get to say all that I wanted to say so far as the family is concerned, but that's okay. This took a slightly different turn. And it's been really great. Were there any other questions?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you, Elaine, for being willing to share your story with everyone this evening. Thank you, Nancy, for being here to facilitate it. A guest in the audience has brought something for you that they would just like to say, something that they brought this evening.
I appreciate you and your family, and Sharon Burton Turner is going to join me because we appreciate your great grandfather, Mr. William Nickens, who was one of the trustees.
No, be free to that. To say something too.
Okay.
Elaine, I have to thank you personally for taking me back to memory lane. Literally, I remember your parents, of course, your mom was my
teacher.
Yes. Your dad was both my mother and father's doctor. Of course, Alan was with me at Montclair High. So it just felt so good to see you and hear you and remember those stories. Thank you so much for sharing.
My pleasure.
And there was a lot about the Black neighborhood that was familiar, especially when you talked about your cousin. That was not really your cousin, but she became your blood cousin as a result of the association. But we wanted to share our appreciation for Mr. Nickens and his bravery in putting his signature on that certificate of incorporation to establish St. Mark's Methodist Church in this town. St. Mark's was the beginning of the community building and faith building in Montclair for the African American community in the late 19th century. And so we want to recognize you and we want to celebrate you with all of these people here. And we will consider you the world. Celebrate you as a part of a family that started a legacy and continues a legacy in this town. And I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
We have something missing.
Elaine, I can remember, being a member of St. Mark's my entire life. I used to always sit behind your aunts at the church. Yes, all of them in the church every single Sunday. I remember sitting behind them. So I feel like your family has been with us forever. And literally, you've done such wonderful things.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both. And thank you again, Elaine. As we close out tonight, just for anyone here, we did record. We will share the recording with anyone who registered on Zoom. And Elaine, I know you wanted to just quickly mention your family scholarship fund before we head out this evening.
I mentioned New Jersey Medical Association. I mentioned National Medical Association. The New Jersey Medical Association is the state chapter of the National Medical Association. And we started a legacy fund in my father's name for students who are, as of right now, going into family medicine. And if you wanted to learn a little bit more about the scholarship legacy fund, the information is on the table in the back, out there.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening.
Thank you.